Welcome to another interview by Project Cargo Weekly. And our guest today is Mr. Steffen Pedersen, partner and lawyer in the Penningtons law firm in Singapore, a Danish native and a good friend of mine. And he has an interesting story to tell, I'm sure. First of all, Steffen, welcome.
Thank you, Bo. Good to be here.
You're most welcome. Good to have you. As I always do with my interviewees, I let the accused, so to speak, have a little talk and introduce themselves. How come you became a lawyer and how did you get to Singapore where you are now?
That's a really big question. As you said, I am a native Dane and I'm born in Denmark. I have Danish parents, but I was the child of adventurous parents. So I moved to London at the age of 9 and Hong Kong at the age of 16. And when I was in Hong Kong, I did a summer placement for a few weeks in a law firm. It doesn't exist anymore. It's called Sinclair Roche and Temple, but it's a maritime law firm. And I read into cases of collisions in Hong Kong Harbor and all these. I went to court and all these exciting things. And that's why I decided I wanted to become a lawyer. That and also because my father was a banker, and that meant pretty much I didn't want to be a banker. Anyway, so I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. So I studied law in London and Hong Kong, and I became a lawyer in Hong Kong. I've spent my entire career in Asia. I became a lawyer in Hong Kong with a firm called Ince & Co, a very famous old shipping firm. And then I spent a few years with them in Hong Kong. Then I went to Shanghai. I was there for 3 years with them as well. I speak Chinese because I studied that in Taiwan as part of my studies. And then I came to Singapore, left Ince, went to Singapore with a Norwegian law firm called Vigborg Rhein 10 years ago. And then I left them 5 years ago to join what was Thomas Cooper, which was the oldest maritime law firm in London. And we were then taken over by Penningtons last year. So I've been in Singapore 10 years. I've been in Asia my whole career. I've lived in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Taipei, and Beijing, and now Singapore. And I became a lawyer, shipping lawyer. Basically, I wanted to be a shipping lawyer, not just a lawyer, but a shipping lawyer specifically, because I just thought it was really exciting and fun and different. And Asia is a great place to be. Right? So that's pretty much my story. It's long.
No, it's a very impressive story. So in one way or the other, you are certainly caught by the Asian virus, I can say, right?
I certainly am. I've married an Asian as well. I should point out, I'm Hong Kong and English qualified, so those are the laws I practice, right?
Okay.
In English law,
right.
And but also I'm qualified in some South Pacific jurisdictions, like Nauru and Kiribati.
It's a very interesting thing, and I think most of our listeners and readers and viewers around the world, they are, of course, let's say small and medium-sized freight forwarders. They sometimes tell me they get scared if they have a claim with another company because they are afraid of going to court. It takes forever. How to do? Can you explain a little bit about the terms for in layman, because us laymen, we don't understand the law and lawyers' terms. Mediation, arbitration. What is mediation? When is that normally used? Arbitration, is that the same as going to court? Try and enlighten our viewers and listeners a bit about these different aspects.
Okay, well, maybe I start with the High Court, with court cases, because that was what was there in the beginning. It's always been there, the courts. In the courts, you start a claim against another party. You turn up before a judge who's not chosen by you. And you argue your case and you get your judgment, and it's either you win or you lose, right? Pretty much. It's 1-0 is 100% one way or the other, and that's how things were traditionally done. The problem for shipping international cases is if you get a court case, say in London, you get a judgment in London. What are you going to do with that judgment if your opponent is in Tunisia? All his assets are in Tunisia? How can you go and enforce your judgment in Tunisia? No. And the answer is, if you can't do that, then what's the point of getting a judgment, right? And it's also expensive to go to court, of course, right? You have to have lawyers, you got to have barristers. It can be stressful because you got to be a witness, or you have witnesses coming, experts coming. Costs can really run up very quickly. So that's courts, and that's how it was done initially. In shipping, what started about, I think, 100 years ago, arbitration became very, very big. And arbitration is effectively like a court case, but you appoint, it's private. So it's agreed in your contract that you will go to arbitration. Okay. And then you appoint your own decision makers, the arbitrators. They're appointed by the parties. and they are paid by the parties. And you have, everything is confidential, so your dispute isn't public. If you go to court and a case is published, it's open to anyone in the world to read it, right? It's available, so it's more confidential arbitration. You're not meant to, it can't be disclosed to anyone outside the arbitration. No one's allowed to talk about it, so it's very useful in that sense. And it was very quick in the beginning. It started out being basically two shipping folk who had a dispute between them. They didn't want to go to court and have a judge they didn't choose, who might not know about shipping, deciding their case.
Right.
Because you might end up with some really bad result because the person doesn't understand the shipping world. Yeah. So these two shipping people decided, well, let's get our friend, the broker or whoever who's knowledgeable about these matters to decide, right? And we agree to be bound by what he decides. Mm-hmm. And that's really how it started. So it's quick, harsh justice, but it was done by an expert, right? And what then happened was lawyers got involved, right? And then lawyers started drafting pleadings and making submissions and insisting on procedures being proper and so on and so forth. So now it is a much more comprehensive, legal proceeding than what it started out as being. It started out being very sort of ad hoc, in the pub almost, a couple of beers, let's just decide. Now it's a proper international business, actually, arbitration. Mm-hmm. And you have some big international arbitration centers devoted to shipping, mainly the LMAA in London, the London Maritime Arbitrators Association. That's the world's biggest, has been for decades. They get about 80% of the cases. And in Singapore, you've got the Singapore Chamber of Maritime Arbitration, which is growing. It's becoming more popular with Asian people. And one of the great things about arbitration, though, which I mentioned with the court case, this idea of enforcing in Tunisia might be difficult. Well, for arbitration awards, you get awards, not judgments in arbitration. For arbitration awards, there is, in 1956, there was a New York Convention made, which was basically to agree the enforcement of international arbitration awards in different countries. Mm-hmm. So if you go to, and it's been signed by 159 countries. Mm-hmm. So if you get an arbitration award from a signatory country to the New York Convention, you can take it to any of those other 158 countries and enforce it. Mm-hmm. So that's very, very powerful. Oh, if you have an arbitration, say in London arbitration, and you have your Tunisian counterparty, and if Tunisia has signed the New York Convention, I don't know if they do, but let's say they have, then you can take your award to the Tunisian courts and they will enforce it for you. So it's a very, very useful and powerful tool. Wow. Arbitration, yeah. Okay. But in essence, it is like a court case. You have an independent person deciding, you're arguing your case, and then they make their decision. Right. And again, it's 1-0, right? Right. Mediation, the last one, that's the more modern sort of, the most recent, it's becoming slowly popular way of resolving disputes. It effectively is the parties being assisted in their negotiations on how to settle it, right? So they agree between them to appoint a mediator, right? And that's a person, an independent third party who doesn't advise them on the law, doesn't make decisions for them. He just facilitates the negotiations between them to try and find the solution that's amicable, that they can then record in an agreement and they can perform. And the good thing about mediation is, of course, it's confidential, but also you can come up with any solution you want. Not just a legal solution. You breach the contract, therefore you pay damages. You can come up with any solution. Right. You can agree that in an agreement. So it's very powerful in that sense, and very popular as well. My personal view is though that arbitration is still better, because mediation, I feel that the shipping parties, by the time they start an arbitration, they've already tried to mediate, right? I mean, the first thing you do if you have a dispute with someone is to try and solve it with them, right? Yeah. You don't immediately go and start an arbitration. You first try and discuss. Of course. And it's only if they're really intransigent that you then go and start an arbitration or a court case. Right. So if you have already tried to negotiate and then you can't get anywhere, appointing an independent negotiator is not going to make much difference, right? Right. Possibly, right? But
may I ask a question in this case? Yeah. For example, I'm, besides being editor of Project Cargo Weekly, as you know, I'm also a chairman of a couple of networks consisting of about 240 project forwarders around the world. And from time to time, they come to me. One of them has a claim with the other one. I try in a way in my small way to mediate and suggest some ideas. But let's say that my let's say home cooked advice won't help. Is there a forum, let's say, for small claims, for small arguments, where I could refer these people to? Let's say they can't get along, they've tried, but they would like to continue to find a mediator in which they both could trust. Could they come to you, for example?
Absolutely, they can come to me. There are plenty of mediation centers around the world.
Okay.
Yeah, there would be many people, I think, able and willing to help in that situation.
You mentioned mediation centers. Is it something that's structured? Can you call yourself professional mediator, or is there an association of mediators?
I'm a qualified mediator. I'm trained in the Singapore Mediation Center. So there are loads of people taking the qualifications now, and it's becoming very popular because, especially in Singapore, because you might have heard of the Singapore Convention, which is basically the equivalent of the New York Convention for arbitrations. It is for mediation agreements. So if you go to mediation and you mediate and you reach an agreement and you record that agreement in writing and you sign it, right? Before, what you would have to do was, if the other party didn't abide by the agreement, you would have to then go start an arbitration and sue them, right, on the agreement. But what the mediation convention has done is to make enforceable the mediation agreement itself directly. Right, so you can take your mediation agreement, show it, look, it's been mediated in front of a qualified mediator. Then you can take that to a court in a signatory state and enforce it directly. So it's getting a little bit more powerful, but because it's called the Singapore Convention, it's become very popular in Singapore to talk about mediation a lot. I'm personally a little bit skeptical, but for really small disputes, it's probably worth doing it.
No, it's what I hear. As you know yourself, most of the claims nowadays, they are not always these highly publicized, gigantic claims. It can also be just normal, everyday claims where people are just trying to be tricky. And I know of many cases where companies who have done well have a small claim, and they almost give up in advance. Okay, the $10,000 I'm owed by that company, forget about it. It's not worth it. But if you add it all up, there are a lot of small claims out there. So they seem to have, in many ways, been falling in between two chairs. But there is a way out for that too, isn't there?
There is. I mean, obviously mediation would be one, but if the other side is refusing to pay or to acknowledge the debt, then mediation is not going to help in any way, right? You need, I think you need, sometimes you need to put a gun to people's heads, right?
Right.
You know, that's when you get results, right? When you start showing people you're serious.
Right.
The smaller claims, you have something called small claims procedure in arbitration centers. So LMAA has a small claims procedure where the legal costs recoverable are limited. The cost of the arbitrator are limited. So that's certainly an option.
Yeah.
And your members should also remember that they can always negotiate with their own lawyer, right? They don't have to accept their own lawyer's fees, right?
Oh, I wish I knew that during my 3 divorces. Please. but
you know, if you have a claim of $10,000, it doesn't make sense to spend $10,000 pursuing it, right?
No.
And a sensible lawyer will understand that, right?
Yeah.
And there are plenty of lawyers. There are many lawyers out there, right? Many, including very small firms. A lot of splintering off. There are people who need work, right? And you can easily negotiate a good deal with someone. You know, spend $2,000 to pursue it, right?
I think that's a very good. Because at least from my generation or even my parents' generation, we see a lawyer, we see a banker, we see a dentist, we see a doctor, we have respect immediately. You know, we don't put questions, let's say, to that profession. So we kind of feel, but there's also been many scandals recently, also here in Scandinavia, with lawyers that have simply written out enormous bills for work they didn't do. And so your profession is also going through a kind of steel bath, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are bad eggs in every profession, but the good thing, and I mean, lawyers are very heavily regulated people, right?
Right.
And my argument for why lawyers are so relatively highly paid is exactly because of that. There's so much we're not allowed to do, right?
Right.
And we're certainly not allowed to overcharge or charge for stuff we haven't done.
Right.
And there are various avenues. I'm shooting myself in the foot here, but there are various avenues open to your members, right? If they're not happy with their lawyer, they can change the lawyer.
Yeah.
Or they can, if they're really unhappy, they can make a complaint to the law society about the lawyer.
Ah, yeah, right.
I mean, people do threaten that, right? And there's no, I mean, you shouldn't use it as a weapon. I mean, you should do it sincerely, right? If there really is a problem. But there are ways that you can control your lawyer. Your lawyer works for you. He's appointed by you. He's your attorney. He does what you say. And he only does what you say. If he does something and you haven't told him to do it, then why pay him for it?
Yeah. No, it's very clear, Steffen. As I said, I wish I knew you during my first couple of marriages. So, but unfortunately, it's $1 late and $1 short. But anyway, life goes on. But no, it's really interesting, and I feel this is certainly something that is very useful for our readers. Tell me. You're based in Singapore, and do you see yourself continuing in Asia, or what are your future plans yourself? And that's not the first question. And number two, do you plan to develop more in the law business? Is there more developments going on in, let's say, mediation, arbitration that you are part of?
Okay, I have spent, the first question, I've spent my entire career in Asia, and I think people come to me because I'm here. So it will be difficult for me to move. Although having said that, I wouldn't mind moving and trying something else. I never worked in Europe, for instance.
Right.
So it's kind of odd for a European, right? And an English lawyer. I've never worked in Europe. But there might, New York would be tempting for me. But we'll see what happens. You never know what happens, right?
Right.
But Asia is a very nice and easy place to be, as you know. My heart is in Hong Kong, but maybe not Hong Kong right now. Yeah,
right.
But it's Asia is where I think I can make the biggest difference. But we'll see. The second question, developments. Yeah, I'm becoming an arbitrator, and the Singapore arbitration, the Singapore Chamber of Maritime Arbitration, where I'm on the panel, is developing quite quick, and I think that's an interesting development in mediation. People, like I say, are talking a lot about it. I'm skeptical.
All right.
If you have a claim, just bring it. I mean, there's no need why you. Oh, I mean, another thing about mediation. Yeah, I mean these negotiated settlements, it's not 1-0, right? You can negotiate anything you like, so it's quite useful.
Right.
But I don't see why you need to compromise your rights. No. So I would, if I was one of your members, I would pay particular attention to your arbitration clause, how you draft it. That's very important.
Yeah.
Because it is. I've written an article on this actually, and I can distribute it to you if you like.
Yes, please.
Because it's very important you get the wording right. It also affects enforceability.
Okay.
So just be very careful with that. And then if you have a claim, then see if the other side wants to mediate, and if not, then just go to arbitration. But developments, my own personal developments, I'm interested in the South Pacific quite a lot.
All right.
I think it's quite an interesting part of the world. I went down to Nauru not too long ago. I'm qualified at the Supreme Court of Nauru.
Okay.
And in some of the other states, Niue and Kiribati. And the reason for that initially is because they have ship registries, right? These are nations that have ship registries,
right? And
ship registries need lawyers to advise, the owners or the banks or whatever when they register mortgages,
right?
And so there is a fair bit of work there, especially in Tuvalu. The Tuvalu ship registry is quite big now. So that was the initial reason, but also I'm quite interested in deep seabed mining, which is something that might be of interest to your members, because this is kind of special projects. And that is an area of an industry that's going to kick off, I think, very, very soon. The regulations for mining the deep seabed in international waters are being finalized. Mm-hmm. And once they're finalized, it's going to be big, because the deep seabed is full of rare earths. And it's going to happen first in the South Pacific nations. They're the first ones to introduce laws governing deep seabed mining. And there is a lot of minerals in their seabeds. So it was also for that reason that I kind of wanted to get involved in that. That's certainly an area you guys should look at, because there will be a lot of projects going on with that, and they will require, as I say, bespoke motherships and all kinds of things that bespoke equipment, right?
I'll certainly let it be known to the members in my networks, and I could imagine that you see a lot of Chinese already there in some of the islands, trying to make relationships with the local governments.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They recently, one of the reasons is that a lot of them recognize Taiwan still.
Yeah.
So the Chinese are quite active, right?
Right.
And they recently got the Solomon Islands and Kiribati to turn to China.
Okay.
And that followed then obviously a lot of Chinese interest and investment and need for lawyers in Kiribati, right? Suddenly I got a lot of emails about Kiribati law, right? but it's becoming a geopolitical center too, right? So for that reason also, there's going to be a lot of action down there.
I suppose many of these governments, it's like they said in the Watergate scandal, just follow the money. And I suppose that whether you, let's say, accept Taiwan or mainland China, then a lot depends on that. But that's really interesting because it's an overlooked area often of the world. We only look at the Pacific Islands as a place for honeymoon, not normally.
Yeah, and they're fascinating. I've read the history of Nauru. It's a fascinating history.
Right.
And I think you need to be innovative, right? I mean, there are many lawyers in Singapore, there are many lawyers in Hong Kong, you know, but how many lawyers are there in Nauru? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And how do you find a Nauru lawyer?
Yeah.
How do you find Google Nauru law? You're going to find me, right? That's the idea. You have to be innovative and creative, I think. So that's kind of what I'm also working on quite a bit. Yeah, just.
A couple of questions here at the end, Steffen. Are you still have family in Denmark, or do you still have any relations there?
Yeah, absolutely. My parents retired to the UK, but they just moved back to Denmark a couple of years ago because of Brexit.
Okay.
They said the UK changed, and they, you know, falling leaves, right? They go back to their roots. Right. So they're back there now, and all my cousins and uncles and aunts. You know, I'm from West Jutland, so we have a big family. a lot of people out there. So I go back. I go back every year. I take my kids back. Right, they're half Korean, half Danish. I take them back.
Fantastic.
As much as I can. I love going back.
Yeah. Do you miss? At least I'm 57 now and left Denmark also many years ago. Although I live in Sweden, which is kind of close to Denmark. Do you sometimes miss Scandinavia as such, being in Asia for so many years?
Yeah, I would not mind to work in Copenhagen. I've never tried it. I worked for a Norwegian firm before. So I went a lot to Oslo. That was quite interesting. Yeah, worked a lot with Norwegian lawyers and stuff. But Copenhagen is a wonderful place, and loads of shipping and just a great people. And I would love for my kids to live there for a bit if they could. But you know, it's not only up to me, right?
I fully understand. No, you're right. Scandinavia is not a bad place to live. It's like many people say, when you travel a lot, after a while, you do start to think of the four seasons. But now I have to admit, here in November, it's rainy and gray here and 8 degrees. I would like to swap places with you right now if I could. But listen, Steffen, I want to say, really, I plan to publish this interview one of the following weeks here. So if you could email me that paper you did on clause arbitration, that would be, I would then add that to the interview here. Okay. And I would now formally like to say thank you very much, Mr. Steffen Pedersen, partner and lawyer of Pennington Law Firm in Singapore, and a good friend and an honest friend, as you can hear from his responses, an honest lawyer. So he's the one. So thank you very much, Steffen.
You're welcome, Bo. Great to see you again. And I'll send you that thing shortly.
And to our viewers, listeners, and readers around the world, this was yet another great interview, and I hope you felt the same with Mr. Steffen Pedersen in Singapore. Stay tuned for more interviews in the coming days and future. Thank you.